So, if you were to put on a scuba suit today, right, and just dive down to the very bottom of the Tai Tam reservoir in Hong Kong,
Which is pretty deep, by the way.
right, very deep, freezing cold, you wouldn't just find a layer of mud. If you knew, like, exactly where to look, you would actually find 100-year-old torpedo-shaped soda bottles.
Oh, and opium containers, too.
Exactly. You'd find these submerged banyan trees and literally the ghostly remnants of an entire drowned village.
It's incredible.
It really is. So today we are taking a deep dive into this fascinating historical research archive that basically deconstructs this one highly specific landscape.
And it's such a brilliant archive because, it completely shatters how we normally look at geography.
Right, because we just assume things have always been there.
Exactly. We tend to look at, like, a nature reserve or a lake, and we just see something timeless. We assume the landscape naturally evolved that way.
But our sources today argue the exact opposite. They present these 5 historical case studies, all centered on the Tai Tam Valley, which is this mountainous region on the southeast side of Hong Kong Island, and they use it to show how history is actually a palimpsest.
A palimpsest, yeah. And for those who might not know, historically a palimpsest was a piece of parchment because, parchment was incredibly expensive in the ancient world.
Right, you could just throw it away.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
whoever was in charge would take an old existing document, scrape the ink off as best they could, and just write their own new text right over it.
But the scraping is never perfect, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you hold that parchment up to the light, you can still see the faint, ghostly traces of the original writing underneath.
You can. And what this archive does is it uses that concept as a shortcut. It helps you understand how empires, engineers, and, well, real estate developers shape the literal physical world around you.
Right. They rewrite the landscape to suit their needs, but the old versions are still hiding there. It's basically a masterclass in how physical space is manipulated by narrative.
It really is. And, the first layer of our palimpsest starts right at the dawn of British colonial rule in the 1840s.
With a very classic, highly convenient origin story.
Oh, totally convenient.
So let's set the scene for the listener. It's 1841. The British have just landed on Hong Kong Island, right?
Right. And according to this foundational legend, they actually meant to land on the southwest side of the island. But the water currents were treacherous, and they ended up way off course.
Just completely lost.
Yeah, vulnerable and lost in this southern area called Stanley. And as the story goes, they are rescued by a local boatwoman named Ah Kwan.
Okay, so this local savior figures steps in.
Supposedly, yeah.
Yeah.
She guides these lost British troops over the steep, really treacherous mountains, right through the Tai Tam Valley, all the way to the North Shore.
Which would eventually become the Victoria City, the capital.
Exactly. And because of her, the British named this vital path Kwan Tai Lo, or Ah Kwan's Road.
Right. And there's even that parallel myth, isn't there, that when she was guiding them, they asked what the place was called. She answered in her local dialect, and the British misheard her.
Right, and that's supposedly how the entire territory got the name Hong Kong.
I mean, it's an incredibly romantic story. But let me push back for a second here, because why are our sources so skeptical of this? Like, couldn't it just be a genuine linguistic misunderstanding by a bunch of exhausted soldiers?
I mean, you would think so, right? But the archive points out that when you actually look at the 1841 census data,
The actual hard numbers.
right, the boring bureaucratic numbers taken right when they arrive, there was no grand origin story waiting in the mountains. There was literally just a tiny 50-person fishing village in the area.
50 people.
Yeah. And its name was indeed Kwun Tai Lo. But Kwun Tai didn't mean Ah Kwan. It translates to skirt string.
Skirt string, like as in the road wound around the mountainside like the string of a skirt.
Precisely. It was just a purely geographical descriptor used by the locals. But, Skirt String Road doesn't exactly give a newly arrived empire a sense of grand destiny, does it?
No, not at all. So you see the colonial government basically taking this mundane geographical name, mixing it up with some local rumors, and actively morphing it into a founding myth.
Exactly. It was a deliberate PR move.
But why, though? Like, why does an empire with guns and warships need an origin story?
Because you have to legitimize your occupation to two very different audiences. You need to tell the locals, look, your own people welcomed us and literally guided us here.
Right.
And you also need to tell the politicians back in London that you have a clear mandate to stay. But the most fascinating part is how they solidified this myth.
Right, they didn't just write it in a history book.
No, they etched it into reality. In 1846, they erected these massive, heavy granite milestones along this route through Tai Tam, officially carving the myth into the infrastructure.
And one of those milestones is still standing there today, right?
Right. Still there. And they went even further. They put Aquan, this supposedly historical guide, on the official colonial seal in 1843.
Wow.
They put her on the flag. She was even depicted on the $10 banknote all the way up until 1959.
Think about that. You invent a myth, and then you literally force people to trade with it in their pockets every single day.
It's wild.
It's so much like how modern corporations operate. They invent this romantic origin story to cover up a mundane reality. Like, oh, we started with nothing but a dream in a garage.
Right, while completely ignoring the massive seed capital and trust funds that actually built the company.
Exactly. It turns a convenient story into a fact on the ground. But as we know, carving a milestone doesn't actually give you legal ownership over an entire valley.
No, it doesn't. You can carve a rock, but a rock doesn't give you the legal right to kick people off their ancestral farms.
Right, which raises the question, how did they actually weaponize the law to take total control of the Tai Tam Valley?
To do that, they used a completely unassailable excuse. They used public health.
Okay, so let's unpack this next layer. We're moving to the late 19th century now. What is happening in Hong Kong at this point?
Well, the population of the Victoria City area is absolutely booming, and the public health situation is just dire. We're talking massive overcrowding, rampant disease, terrible sanitation.
And the existing water supply was just completely inadequate for that many people.
Totally inadequate. So the colonial government decides to execute a massive waterworks project right in the Tai Tam Valley, primarily because it's naturally enclosed by mountains.
So it acts as this massive natural rain catchment.
Exactly.
And from a purely engineering standpoint, what they accomplished was staggering. I mean, the archive details how they built this complex over 35 years from 1883 to 1918.
Yeah, the crown jewel was the Tai Tam Puk reservoir, which was overseen by this engineer named Daniel Jaffa.
Right, and when they finished that dam in 1918, it was literally called the Asian First Dam. They also built the first water treatment plant in Hong Kong with slow sand filters.
And those filters were a huge technological leap for the time. Because instead of just using chemicals, slow sand filters use a biological layer.
Like bacteria.
Yeah, it's this complex ecosystem of bacteria that naturally grows on top of the sand, and it literally consumes the pathogens in the water as it seeps through.
That is brilliant. But, reading the archive, I was completely blown away by their original abandoned plan. Because before they built inland, they actually tried to build a dam directly in the sea.
The sea dam concept, yes.
Yeah.
Straight across Tai Tam Bay.
I mean, that sounds like an absolute engineering nightmare. Why build in the ocean?
It was incredibly ambitious, especially since it was proposed like half a century before anyone else in the region successfully pulled off an ocean reservoir. But the logic was, if you block off an entire ocean bay, you capture 100% of the freshwater runoff from the surrounding mountains.
Oh, so you don't have to navigate building in the steep inland terrain.
Exactly. But the actual mechanism of building it just completely failed. The sheer kinetic energy of the ocean waves kept destroying the foundation before they could even stabilize it.
So you just had to abandon it and move inland anyway.
Yeah, eventually they gave up on the sea dam.
So, okay, it's an undeniable engineering marvel inland. But our sources challenge us to look past the concrete and see something they call colonial hydraulic governance.
Right.
How does building a water filter equate to governing people?
Because controlling the water means you control the land it falls on. The government used this massive project to draft the Waterworks Ordinance.
And this wasn't just like a safety law.
No, it was a mechanism of sheer power. The law allowed them to strictly define these massive water catchment areas. And by doing so, they essentially reclassified vast tracts of indigenous village land as crown land.
So they basically just pointed at a map and said, every drop of rain that falls here belongs to the public. Therefore, this entire mountain belongs to the government.
Precisely. And then they outlawed farming because, fertilizer might contaminate the water. They outlawed cutting down trees because tree roots prevent soil erosion into the reservoirs.
And this wasn't happening everywhere in the territory, was it? Because our sources point out a pretty massive legal disparity.
Yes, and that is a crucial distinction to make. In the new territories, which the British leased later on indigenous villagers, actually had certain collective land rights legally recognized.
But on Hong Kong Island?
Right, on Hong Kong Island, where Tai Tam is, the colonial government operated on the assumption that it was all crown land from day one. So the villagers in Tai Tam had zero legal leverage.
Which brings us back to that drowned village I mentioned at the very beginning of the deep dive. Tai Tam village.
Yes, the very real human cost of all this brilliant engineering.
The archive details this Hakka village, which was established way back in the late 18th century. About 76 people lived there, mostly sharing the surname Chung.
They had a temple, an ancestral hall, bridges.
Right, it was a functioning, multi-generational community.
Hmm.
And because the new dam had to go exactly where they lived, they were just wiped off the map. It was literally the first time in Hong Kong's history that an entire village was submerged for a reservoir.
They were relocated with, honestly, very marginal compensation, and the valley was just flooded. And this brings up a really profound issue with historical archives themselves.
How so?
Well, the official government records from the time are incredibly meticulous about the engineering. Like, we have the blueprints of the dam down to the millimeter.
But the records are silent on the people.
Almost completely silent on the lives of the displaced villagers, yeah.
Right, like if researchers literally have to put on scuba gear and dive into freezing mud just to find old soy sauce jars and soda bottles to prove these people lived complex lives, what does that say about how history is recorded?
It says a lot. The archive preserves the victor, the engineer, the bureaucrat.
And the marginalized get literally washed away. It is the brutal scraping of the palimpsest. The village is scraped away. The reservoir is written right over it.
Exactly. But as we see in the next era, you can engineer the landscape for resources all you want, but engineering doesn't really protect you from a military invasion.
Right, which catapults us to December 1941. The Japanese launched their attack on Hong Kong simultaneously with Pearl Harbor. And suddenly, Tai Tam isn't just a water source anymore.
No, its steep valleys and ridges make it a highly strategic military choke point. Geography always dictates strategy.
So what happens when the Japanese land?
They landed on the north shore and immediately drove south toward Tai Tam and Wong Nai Chung Gap. Their goal was simple, really. Use the steep terrain against the defenders.
By driving a wedge through those valleys?
Yes. By doing that, they could slice the island's defense right down the middle, completely cutting the British East Brigade off from the West Brigade.
When you look at who was actually standing in those valleys defending the line, it's just this striking image of empire.
It is the imperial military strategy laid bare, honestly. It's using colonial bodies to fight colonial wars.
The diversity of the troops stationed at Tai Tam was incredible. You had the Canadian Sea Force, and a lot of those guys were completely inexperienced recruits who had barely even finished training.
Right.
You had Indian Rajput regiments. You had the local Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps, which was this incredibly mixed group of British, Portuguese, Eurasian, and Chinese residents.
It was a multi-ethnic defense line forced to hold together a colonial system that, ironically, categorized them as completely unequal during peacetime.
Wow, yeah.
And the archive stresses that we really have to hold two contrasting truths in our heads here when looking at this battle. Because on one hand, you had unbelievable acts of individual bravery on the ground.
Like Company Sergeant Major John Osborne.
Exactly. Osborne was part of the Canadian forces defending the hills near the Tai Tam reservoirs. And the records show that during a really ferocious engagement, the Japanese were rolling grenades down into his unit's position.
And he was picking them up right.
Yes, picking them up and throwing them back barehanded. But then when one landed where he just couldn't reach it in time, he threw his own body over the grenade to save his men.
He was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross for that.
He was. It's an unimaginable level of personal sacrifice.
It really is. But the archive demands that we contrast Osborne's heroism with what was happening just a few miles away inside the actual command structure.
The East Brigade bunker.
Right. So explain this bunker to the listener, because this completely blew my mind.
Okay, so the East Brigade bunker at Tai Tam Gap was this massive subterranean command center. It was built straight into the mountainside in the 1930s.
Like a supervillain lair.
Basically. It was designed to be the impenetrable nerve center for the defense of the entire eastern half of the island. It had thick concrete walls, complex ventilation, everything you'd need to coordinate a massive defense.
And what actually happened to it during the battle? Was it blown up?
No, it was completely abandoned.
Abandoned.
Yeah, it never even took a direct artillery hit. The walls held perfectly, but it was abandoned because the command chain completely collapsed.
But how does an impenetrable bunker just fail from the inside?
It comes down to the mechanism of communication. In 1941, you relied heavily on physical telephone wires and line-of-sight radios.
Okay.
So, artillery barrages easily shredded the physical cables connecting the East Brigade to the West Brigade. And because Tai Tam is a series of incredibly steep, jagged hills, line-of-sight radios were practically useless.
Oh, wow. So they were just cut off.
Completely. The commanders inside the bunker were blinded and deafened. They couldn't issue orders. They couldn't call for artillery support.
It's not just like forgetting to pay the Wi-Fi bill, right? It's like building a billion-dollar state-of-the-art server farm, but completely forgetting to lay the physical fiber optic cables to connect it to the outside world.
That's a great analogy.
An isolated fortress is just a tomb.
Yeah.
The men outside, like Osborne, were fighting with unbelievable courage, but the structural infrastructure of the empire is just fundamentally broken.
That is exactly the point the archive makes. The landscape was weaponized by the military, but the system entirely failed to adapt to the reality of the geography.
And after the war, the era of massive military outposts began to fade. The palimpsest was ready to be scraped yet again.
Which brings us to our fourth and arguably most fascinating layer. We jump ahead to the 1970s.
The McLehose era of Hong Kong governance.
Right. The colonial government decides to draw a brand new boundary around Tai Tam. And this time, they use a word that sounds universally positive, something literally nobody could possibly argue with.
Conservation.
Yes, the Country Parks Ordinance of 1976.
Right. The government designates a fifth of Hong Kong Island, including the entire Tai Tam Valley, the reservoirs, the old battlefields, into a legally protected nature reserve, the Tai Tam Country Park.
And on paper, this sounds like a massive triumph for the public, right? They are giving the land back to nature.
It absolutely sounds that way. But the archive points out a glaring, massive contradiction staring you right in the face when you actually walk through the supposedly protected park.
A massive contradiction named Hong Kong Parkview.
Yes, Hong Kong Parkview, or Yang Ming Shun Zwang. It is a residential complex built between 1981 and 1989.
And if you've never been there, you really have to picture this. Imagine you are hiking through a pristine, legally protected forest canopy, and suddenly, looming 300 meters above sea level right in front of you, is a complex of 18 massive luxury residential towers.
18 towers.
Yes, and it is completely surrounded on three sides by the legally protected country park.
It makes no sense. Like, how is that legally possible?
Yeah.
Did a developer just break the law and secretly build a skyscraper in a forest?
No, they didn't break the law at all. The law bent for them.
Wow.
This is what geographers and urban planners call an enclave, or an inholding. The meta-analysis in the archive explains that this isn't just some quirky zoning error. It actually reveals a deep structural reality about how post-colonial governance operates.
So explain the mechanism there. How does a strict conservation law just bend?
Because conservation boundaries, historically, have this habit of visually mapping themselves around existing private property and capital.
Oh, I see.
Through a series of grandfather clauses, land exchanges, and highly specific zoning approvals, the government drew the map of the country park so that it intentionally jogged inward to entirely exclude the specific acreage owned by the developer.
So they just carved it out.
Exactly. The justification for controlling the land in Tai Tam shifted from, we need water, to we need military defense, to we need environmental conservation. But the underlying priority, protecting private capital, remained completely untouched.
It is basically gerrymandering, but for nature.
Yes.
You draw this highly irregular boundary to protect elite real estate, while telling regular people they will be slapped with a fine if they step off the hiking trail. So let me get this straight. We went from displacing a poor Hakka village because we strictly needed public water,
Right.
to bending the rules of a public nature reserve to accommodate private luxury swimming pools.
Exactly. It proves that the conservation layer of the palimpsest is just as selective and just as constructed by those in power as the colonial myth layer from the 1840s.
It is just wild to look at the timeline laid out like this.
It really is. And if we synthesize everything we've looked at today, a very clear pattern emerges from the archive. Over 2 centuries, the boundaries of this one single valley were constantly redrawn.
Always by whoever was in charge.
Right. First, by the mythmakers inventing an origin story to claim it. Then, by the water engineers drowning a village to control it.
Then the military generals.
Drawing defensive lines that ultimately failed. And finally, by conservationists whose green lines perfectly accommodated luxury developers.
And in every single era, it's the common people, the villagers losing their ancestral homes, the diverse foot soldiers thrown into a structurally doomed defense who end up paying the price, while the landscape is rewritten by whoever is holding the pen.
It is a relentless cycle of erasure and reinvention. The mountains remain, the water remains, but their legal and social purpose is constantly reassigned to serve whichever power structure is currently in charge.
Which leaves you with one final lingering question to ponder long after you finish this deep dive. If undeniable public goods, things we all universally agree are necessary, like clean water, national defense, and environmental conservation, were all historically used as mechanisms to quietly seize land and erase marginalized communities. What universally praised, undeniably good initiative is happening in your city right now that might be doing the exact same thing.
It definitely forces you to look at city planning and zoning maps through a much more skeptical lens, doesn't it?
It really does. The next time you're walking through a beautiful, pristine park, maybe take a closer look at the dirt and ask yourself who drew the boundaries. You never know what's been scraped away. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious out there.